Hi everybody, I'm Anthony Jamroz. I'm from Cecil, Wisconsin. Graduated from Bondwell High School in 2003. I was in the Army Reserves from the end of 2002 till 2010 and a half. And I served as a reservist. My unit was out of Dubuque, Iowa. We were a headquarters company in an engineer heavy battalion. I was supposed to serve 1 week in a month and 2 weeks a year, but that didn't happen. I got deployed twice during my enlistment to Iraq both times. I joined when I was in high school, so I was a senior in high school, and I went through training, and at the end of '03, fall, late summer of '03, and during that time, I served with my unit 1 week in a month before I went to training. So right after I signed up, they invaded Iraq, and my unit got called to serve in Iraq right away as in BIOP. So they went over there in early '03 right away before I was even through training. So when I got done with training at the beginning of '04, I went back to a company that was pretty depleted. Everybody was still deployed. So there was just a couple of people that couldn't go. They had some people join the unit afterwards. They had a little bit of a very small group while I was there. And then they came back sometime in '04. And so I went to school in fall of '04 and fall and spring. And then I got my first deployment orders in right after spring semester of 2005. And so everybody that was left in our unit who didn't deploy, some of us got deployed afterwards by ourselves with other units. So I was in the 89th Division in the Army Reserves. So they deployed us, or I got deployed with the 1011th Combat Support Company we deployed out of Farmington, Missouri. We were made up of probably 30 different companies all over the Midwest. We were a quartermaster company. We went to, we were there for 2 weeks in Farmington, Missouri, and then we went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for several months. Katrina happened, kind of delayed our going to Kuwait, and then we went to Kuwait late fall. We were in Kuwait a couple weeks before Thanksgiving. We did 2 weeks in Kuwait, and we flew from Kuwait to BIOP Air Force Base in Baghdad, Iraq on Thanksgiving Day in 2005. And then I lived at a little operation base 10 minutes from BIOP. We're the farthest western point of Camp Liberty. It was called Log Base Sites. And we lived there for most of my deployment. The first month, we used to get mortared all the time. I think we had a calendar at one point, and I think we had over 100 mortar attacks. We were keeping track of a lot of different times. I mean, we started getting mortared the first day we were there. We had 110 bunkers on the little base we lived on, and there was only 4 or 5 companies that lived on that base. The first month I was there, I worked at the Talk at night by myself, and we also ran a little gas station for Bradleys and tanks. the Abrams and all the other tanks that the 3rd ID and the 4th ID were using. So they'd call me on the radio at night, and then I'd run out. We lived on a blackout fob, so that means everything's black at night. And so, you take your little red light and find your way over, try not to trip over too much stuff on the way to the other side of the base where we had the gas pumps, turn the gas on for them, and they filled up their tanks. And then when they were done, I turned it off, came back to the talk, and anything that happened on the radio for the whole battalion, I relayed. If I had to go rake at the commander, the 1st sergeant, I did all that. And then I did that for the first month. And then I had to go on leave early, like early January, I think right after my 21st birthday. I think it was like late January. They're like, if you don't go now, you don't get to go at all. So I went on leave. And then when I came back, there was a lot of the Iraqi trucking company lost most of their workers, so they needed more help with logistics over there hauling fuel and supplies around the Baghdad area. So they turned us into basically a transportation company, because we were primarily doing supply work over there. The rest of the unit was, and then so we did a couple weeks of driver's training, maybe a week, 2 at the most. We're learning I learned how to drive a fuel truck in Iraq, and after a week of doing some training around the fob, next thing you know, I'm driving on the worst highway in the world with 5,000 gallons of MoGas on the back of my truck. So did that for most of my rest of my deployment, my first deployment, or the majority of my deployment. We hauled fuel all over the Baghdad area, and then we had a platoon that hauled fuel, and then we had a platoon that hauled supplies, water, anything that was in Connex boxes they could put on the back of their trucks. They're called I think they were called PLSs, and then they palletized loading systems. And then they would put the supplies on the back of their trucks and haul it all over the Baghdad area. And I know when they were setting up for the Battle of Sadr City, the guys hauling the supplies around also helped set up all the Jersey barriers around Sadr City to box in the bad guys before they went in there and did what they do. And then, so yeah, I did that for a long time hauled fuel around most of my deployment. And then they sent me to this other base for like a month, and we provided fuel for the whole base. So we ran a gas station for a couple hours a day. Then we also went around and filled all the generators on this little fob. It was mostly civilians on this fob. There was a couple of platoons of military. They were training the Baghdad Police College, or the Baghdad Police and the National Guard over there. And there was some special forces guys helping them with that. And we'd help them with their little missions, getting them fuel and whatnot when they needed it. And then when I came back, we rotated out of that. And we'd send 2 or 3 guys from our company, and we'd do like a month or 2 stint there, and then we'd switch it out, so you wouldn't have to be away from the company the whole time. And then after that, I came back to the company, or they would do missions to our base, once a week to bring us more fuel. So we did get to see them every time they did a mission. And then when I rotated out, I went back on doing missions with my platoon, and then it was my turn to do force protection at the end of my first deployment, and then I did probably 2 months of that right at the end before we went home. And then so I worked at an entrance control point, did tower guard, which is the worst job I think I ever had in the military. sitting in the guard tower for like 8 to 10 hours a night and just looking at. There wasn't even anything cool to look at. A bunch of wild dogs, and sometimes you had a tower next to you that were with Iraqi National Guards. And they'd get a little drunk after a soccer match, and one night they actually tried to shoot at the other tower. So that was a kind of a fiasco we had to deal with. But other than that, I pretty much wraps up my first deployment. Came home. We demobbed out of came home and right before Halloween at the end of 2006, and we came home to Fort McCoy, and I got really sick because it was cold, because I hadn't been home in a long time, and I wasn't used to, obviously it was a lot hotter over there, so I was cold, and I got sick right away, and we just did a quick demo, took like a week, and then I got to go home. Then I went back to college, my reserve unit out of Dubuque, Iowa, and for a couple more years, your contract is, your first contract, at least when I was in, was a 6-2 contract. You do 6 years of active reserve time and 2 years of inactive reserve time. And then, so I got to at the end of 2008, I was up on my 6-year mark, and wasn't really feeling it anymore, so I got out, or I thought I was going to get out. So I said I didn't want to, I wanted to do my 2 years of IRR time. Nobody gets recalled, I never heard anybody getting recalled, and got out of the Army Reserves after my 6 years at the end of 2008, and in January of 2009, I got my orders to go to Afghanistan. And so I got recalled. And I got recalled with guys who had gotten out in the Clinton administration that hadn't been in the military for almost 20 years. They took an early retirement deal because when Clinton was in charge, they cut out, hey, they wanted to cut down on spending, so they got rid of some of the military. And so some of these guys that took that deal ended up getting recalled right before their 20-year commitment of the IRR ran out. And so it was interesting. Couple of weeks, you could do this medical in processing. They sent all of us to Fort Jackson in South Carolina, and then they do medical, make you cut your hair, kind of like some of the people have been out of the military for a long time, so they didn't know how to shoot a rifle anymore and all this. So you kind of do like a little crash course on training for a couple weeks, and then they send you to a school refresher. So whatever your MOS was in the military, they send you to like a quick 2-week crash course on MOS refresher. And so we did our medical. If you passed your medical, and after the doctors looked at you and deemed that you were healthy enough to deploy, they sent you on to do these refresher courses to all the different bases where they have, different classes. I got to stay at Fort Jackson because I was at my primary MOS as admin, so they did me a 2-week crash course on that, and then they put after our 2-week crash course, they put us in a unit that was deploying, and the unit I got deployed or put in new was the Gulf Company 106th. It was part of the 155 Infantry Brigade out of Mississippi, National Guard unit. They ended up deploying us back to Iraq. And there was a bunch of, when they do deployments, they pull everybody from everywhere. So there was a bunch of our recalls that I knew that I had, trained up with, and met them again after they did their 2-week crash course, and got to, some of us ended up getting deployed in the same company, because you need the extra people because not everybody's at 100% strength. And so yeah, going back to combat zone again with nobody I know. And this time around, we deployed out of Camp Shelby in Mississippi. We were there for probably a month. And this was like mid 2009. And then we were there for a month, and then they flew us to Kuwait. We were in Kuwait for a couple weeks to get climatized. It was pretty hot in Mississippi, so it was, it wasn't too bad. We were kind of used to the heat. And then we were in Kuwait for a couple weeks, and then they flew us up to northern Iraq to a base called Q West. And we did convoy security out of Q West in northern Iraq. It's 20-30 minutes south of Mosul, and we were doing super convoys, they called them. I did convoys my first tour, so I ended up being the scout element, or most of my tour over there. And the scout element was 2 trucks, the front 2 trucks, and we were 2 miles in front of everybody else, looking for IEDs and all that fun stuff, and looking for the problems that we'd run into when we were doing our missions. And was up there every time we went out the wire, I was up there most of the time. It was the first truck, a good portion of the convoys I was on. And we did missions all over northern Iraq. We went to Sinjar a lot. A lot of our missions were up to, we drive through ancient Kurdistan, where all the Kurds are. So you drive through downtown Mosul, and once you get past it, you get to like ancient Kurdistan, or that's what we called it, past checkpoint 5, and then you were like in a safe zone. You could take your stuff off, and then you had to drive through the mountains of ancient Kurdistan, and these big, top-heavy gun trucks up these steep mountains and it was a little sketchy, but we always made it. We didn't want to go off the edge because there was no guardrails either. And then we'd go up to the Turkey border, and there was this the hotel they had up there. They kind of turned into like a little military depot, and we'd wait at the border, and then they would truck in supplies and from Turkey, and then we'd escort the supplies from the border down or back down to Mosul or back to Q West. And then we were at Q West for the majority of our tour. Right at the end of our tour, they decided they wanted us to move our company back to where most of our battalion was. So they moved us up to Mosul with them on Fob Marez. And that was in early 2010, I think, or late 2009 that they moved us up there. And then we were up there until we left, and I think we left at the end of February or March of 2010. And after that, I got out and been out ever since. Went back to college at the University of Wisconsin-Platteville, and got my degree in construction management after I graduated in 2012, after spring semester, and I got a job with being a commercial roof consultant, and I've been doing that ever since. Been there for over 13 years. We've all done different things we've had to do for our country, and just try the best to take care of us, I think. And I think our community needs to do a better job of taking care of our own too. I mean, we're doing a lot, but we can do better, because nobody understands us better than other veterans that And I learned that in college a lot too, because we had a veterans club, and I swear we saved lives by just talking to other veterans that went through similar experiences, and talking to people that understand or have walked in your shoes is vital to getting over whatever you went through during your service for your country.